Into session. There's a lot of traffic out there. It's just a little bit after 9, so we'll go ahead and get started with our regularly scheduled school board workshop meeting. And board members and superintendent, I'll do as usual. I'll read through each item, and if you have questions or comments, please make sure I stop so that we can attend to those. And of course, the first item on the agenda is opening of the meeting and then the approval of the agenda. And there is an agenda change, and so I want to go ahead and read that at this time. For the regular meeting of May 29th, 2018, administrative personnel appointments. Added item 6.1, appointment of the assistant principal 2 at Meigs Middle School, and added item 6.2, appointment of assistant principal to Florosa Elementary School. So that was items 6.1 and 6.2. All right, with those changes noted, we'll go ahead and move through the agenda. We do have some recognitions on Tuesday evening. First, 3.1 would be the Children in Crisis Change for Children campaign, presented by Mrs. Jenny Hamilton, Ann Johnston, and Kitty Johnson, and Mary Jane Ross. 3.2 would be recognition of Blue Water Bay Tennis Center, presented by the superintendent. And 3.3, recognition of first place winners of the FLYRA Middle School State Championship and FHSAA Class 3A Outdoor State Championship. We are showing one visitor, 4.1, Emily Lamberson, proposed relocation of pre-KD classes. Item 5 would be public comment. Item 6, 6.1, I just gave you those, would be the appointment of the assistant principal 2 at Meigs Middle School, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 6.2 is the appointment of the assistant principal to Florosa Elementary School, recommended by the superintendent for approval. Then moving on to section 7, committee and staff reports, workshop only. 7.1, in-county travel paid for the period of April 26th through May the 9th, 2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. 7.2, out-of-county travel paid for the period of April 26th through May the 9th, 2018, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. Item 7.3, review of vacant land inventory, presented by Dr. Bill Smith, Specialist, Custodial Services and Facilities. Dr. Smith, would you please come forward and give us a rundown of our property inventory?
Thank you very much. Laying in front of you is a packet that looks very similar to this. This is also on your agenda on your computer too. Also should also be. What I intend to talk about first is what we consider vacant land in our fish inventory. Please stop me or please ask questions as we go along. So we'll get as much good information to you as I possibly can. This information was requested that we bring forward to the board just to give you information about what we have and what we own. The first parcel of land on the fish inventory is what we call the Lovejoy Road property, which is the parcel of land that was left over after we did the land swap with the academy, which is the 16 acres that is on Martin Luther King and Lovejoy Road, which also has a lake on the back of it, which a lot of people don't even realize is there. But it's the piece that is very similar to this. Probably about 50% of that property would be considered wetlands. So there's probably about 50% of the property is usable land. The second piece is what we call the 602, Highway 602 property. It's the next map in your packet. It's a 40-acre parcel. It's just north of Highway 602, which would be west of Laurel Hill School. I think there's also a map that shows you the vicinity of where the school lies with reference to the property. This piece of property was conveyed to us in the 50s by the Campbell family, and the strange part about it is it's titled to the Florida State Board of Education, but it's on the tax rolls as belonging to us. It's held in the Florida land inventory very similar to like a road right-of-way would be held. but it's titled to us. So if anything were ever be done with that piece of property, that issue would probably be cleared up. All the property we handle and all the property in our inventory, the tax deed or the tax notice is mailed to Lowry Place, except that 140-acre parcel, and this is mailed to some building in Tallahassee.
Well, that 40-acre parcel, that's the one where the only right-of-way we had to it. We had to go through the front yard of the individual, and then the best I remember when that piece came up at one time is a timber company infringed on it and cut all the big pines off of it and all that a number of years ago. Is that not the piece you're referring to?
I think it is, Mr. Walker. It's a parcel that you're not going to get to unless you have a four-wheel drive truck and a GPS and some pretty good nerves.
And it had some large pines on it at one time, but I think most of them were cut off a good number of years ago illegally, the best I remember.
I was on the property probably about 4 years ago. It had some significant timber on it, but it's completely surrounded by what we used to call the Container Corporation property, which has now been sold to a group of hunters out of Pace, Florida, that hunt the property now, that basically surrounds that. They own about probably about 2,000 acres that borders, I think it borders it on two sides.
Well, Bill, would the superintendent and her staff have the authority to even consider selling it to people that surrounded it? It's landlocked is what it amounts to. And I know at one time the timber was at one time fairly valuable. I don't know about the property itself.
I wouldn't know what the value per acre is considering its remoteness. I think the property, from what I've read on the deed, I think the property is sellable if the title on the deed could be straightened out, and that would be something that Jeff would have to weigh in on.
In other words, is it at this point in time, what you're saying is even if we wanted to sell it right now, we couldn't sell it? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Well, I think the property's sellable as long as we can straighten out it's listed as school land. It's on the tax rolls of Okaloosa County as school land. The deed just reads State Board of Education, which is probably a holdover from prior 1915 when a lot of the land was all held by the state.
When I went up and looked at it several years ago, I nearly got shot by the person where I went through.
I have been through that front yard, yes.
He threatened me and all that, and I never went back. So, but
anyway, that little section of road is a little better defined as a road now, but it's also hard to define what's there is actually a road because it's just kind of a sand trail.
Okay.
That's that parcel. The next piece would be what we call the Shalimar property. There's actually two parcels of land that were transferred to us from the government when Shalimar Elementary School was built. We received the parcel that the school sits on, and we also own 40 acres to the north of that school campus, which was on the same, I think, one of the same deeds that we got the choice property with. But I think it came from the Department of Interior. That parcel of land is not sellable. It has a reverter clause in it.
Well, now, on that reverter clause, and I don't know if Jeff's, but I thought I had read somewhere that they had changed those laws, and that we're on the reverter clause with school districts and stuff, that it was where they had changed that to where actually we could actually sell it or do whatever we wanted to. Is that, Jeff, have you not, for some reason I read where they had changed the federal laws on that to where that was a possibility now. We're a lot like, several of our schools that we haven't been able to borrow money and all that because of that, but I thought I'd read somewhere where they had changed that.
I'm not familiar with that change, Mr. Walker, but I would tell you that the district worked with Okaloosa County some years ago, and we did work on the potential here for leasing to another governmental agency, but not anything about an outright sale. At one time, this parcel was being looked at by the county for a courthouse location, I believe. And we did have to talk to,
And I just wanted the board to be aware, and it
federal
may
government
well
about that.
be that we want to look at the fact, and I may be incorrect, but I know when the county commissioners are wanting to put a courthouse on that piece
yeah,
you was
and that's what
talking
you're
about.
remembering, we did
And that's
go,
where we knew we had permission to give it to them or sell it to them.
got that authorized, but not beyond that.
Right, okay.
Also, about maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, there was some discussion about swapping this piece. There was just some discussion with the Air Force about swapping this piece for another piece in a different location that might be more usable for both parties, because the Air Force might consider wanting that one back, but there never was any progress in that respect. The next parcel of land is what we refer to as Lancaster Road. It's a 25-acre parcel just on the right, just past Rocky Bayou Bridge as you're going toward Blue Water Bay. It's a parcel of land we've had since it went on the inventory in 1990. It's a nice, flat, very usable piece of property, very marketable, probably the most valuable piece of property we own as far as dollar value.
Now, that piece of property also, part of that, a small portion of it fronts Highway 20, correct?
That's correct. It's this
I mean,
piece right here.
uh,
That's correct.
And then,
The big chunk of it borders Highway 20.
And I don't know if the board, some of the board members were not here, but back in the boom, the last boom we had, it was worth several million. And then it's now getting back up close to what it was previously. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was there any future plans for a school on, is it big enough for a school to be put on here?
This parcel of land, and Jeff can help me with this parcel of land was acquired about the same time that the property that Blue Water Elementary School was acquired, and there was some land swapping going on, and that's the way this property was acquired for future growth. And the district staff has always feel like this is a land bank piece of property that if we ever needed another school campus in some location, it would be a great piece to
Bill,
swap.
I thought how we actually ended up with that property is, best I remember, was when the outfit came in to do Blue Water Bay. Actually, and the government was involved in it, is they actually, Mr. Brown, I think how we ended up with it was, part of the deal is they had to agree to let us have that parcel of property for them to agree to let Blue Water Bay do all that they did. And that's kind of how.
That's correct.
That's how we ended up with the property. The government made them let us have the property for them to allow them to do their development.
Gannon State Park actually originally went all the way across the road. It was a huge parcel of land there, and there was a land swap that took place to where Blue Water Bay got the property, which is now Magnolia Shores, or the Magnolia area of Blue Water. The next piece in your stack is the property that we discussed at the last board meeting, the 6 or 7 acres that is located about 4 or 5 blocks north of the Baker School campus. As you'll see in the picture, the back, probably the back 1/3 of it, that's a floodplain. You can see it on the map. On the right front corner of the property, where it faces Monroe Street, that would be the Baker Water Works. The building on the left corner of it is a piece of property that we have a long-term lease with Okaloosa County, and they have an ambulance station there. Next piece of property, there's actually 2 pictures because it's 2 parcels, but they're right side by side. It's on Sunnyside, just north of the Laurel Hill School campus. We refer to it as the J.P. Day property. It was property donated to the school board by the J.P. Day family. And I haven't looked at that deed in a long time, but I think there's a reverter clause in that. Jeff, do you remember?
I don't remember, but I remember the transaction, but I don't remember that.
But it was a donation by that family to the Laurel Hill School. The next piece is a piece that's about a block north of the Laurel Hill School campus. I think this is used some by the school. It's got a track on it. It's on Park Avenue and 4th Street. That's about 4 acres. And it's part of the Laurel Hill campus. I would think it would be a usable property, but only for recreational purposes. The next parcel of land is actually to the west side of the Laurel Hill campus. There's a row of lots there that we own. The only thing, we have a dumpster on that side of the street, but the property's really never been used. It's got a pretty, the topography of it's pretty severe. It falls off pretty bad to the back. But I want to think there's like 6 or 8 lots there, right in a row, coming off the back corner of the property. The next piece is the Laurel Hill property off Sunnyside and Highway 85. It's right directly behind Mr. Moore's establishment on Highway 85. It's a triangular piece of property. We've had it for a fairly long period of time. It's fairly flat. It's fairly usable. It's just has very, very little road access. It has a little tiny front on Sunnyside. This property has come up a number of times over the years. I'm sure Mr. Watt Rocker remembers about people wanting it or wanting to buy it or wanting to do it, and it's been there for a very long time. I think we actually acquired that from the railroad company many, many, many years ago. The next piece in your packet is a 17-acre parcel off Strickland Road and Highway 2. It's 17 acres that was donated to Laurel Hill School by the Tyner family. There is a deed restriction on there that it can be sold, or if any timber or if any sales comes off that property, it goes to the school. It says that on the deed. So if you cut timber off of it, or if you sell it, the money's got to go to that school. And if you're going from Laurel Hill School over to Dorcas Highway or 393, it's about halfway through that section of Highway 2 on your right. Next piece of property is what we call Clear Creek Road. It's the property we acquired from the Watts Group a number of years ago in exchange for the 6 or 7 acre parcel at Holt. 71 acres. It's good flat land. It's very usable land. I don't remember if that had a reverter clause. There was a discussion of giving them the first rights to buy it back if we ever chose to sell it. But I don't think there's anything on the deed. If you're going down Poverty Creek Road, you go just across the creek going toward 393, take a left on Clear Creek Road and go to where you run into the gate. That's the property.
There's several, I think there's about several hundred acres, and when they let us have that, but they were looking at the possibility if we ever build a school there, they was, as far as them developing and everything.
This was
we was able to work the deal with it.
This was a corner of a very, very large parcel.
It's a very large parcel of land surrounding all of it.
Right. I mean, as much as 1,000 acres probably. The next piece in your packet is the Dorcas property. This is the site of an old one-room schoolhouse. Had it for a very, very long period of time. It's directly across the street from Dorcas Baptist Church. If you're going north on 393, right past the bridge, turn right, take a first left, the property will be on your right. There's actually, that school burned there, and actually you can still see the foundation and the steps of the old school, of where the one-room schoolhouse was there. So I think it's a 4-acre site. Now that's what's on your vacant inventory. The last item in your packet is the Lowry property, which is actually 3 parcels. It's one big parcel with the parcel that the one-room schoolhouse used to be put on, and the one on the northwest corner, which was a single house lot that was acquired separately or on a different deed. If you've got a second, I want to talk about a couple of other things that are not on your vacant list, vacant property inventory. Just to keep in mind that we do own the property 25 acres south of Baker School. That was purchased a number of years ago for future expansion of that school. We also own, across the street from transportation, at Northwood, the Northwood Richburg campus. We own 2 1-acre lots across the street from that. We also own what I call the Sandspur and the Richburg field site, which we have under lease agreement with the city of Crestview, and they use them for recreational sites. Those are 4 and 5 acre parcels. I think everybody that's ever lived in Crestview spent some time on those spots. The Lewis School campus is actually a 42 acre parcel of land. It's a very large parcel of land. It's got a reverter clause on it, but we're probably not using 15 acres of that. 15 acres of that land is probably vacant. Silver Sands, we also have a 4 acre parcel there that's adjacent to that school campus back to the east. I'm not sure what the name of it now. We have a corner of that leased to ARC. Is that the name of it now, Jeff? Do you remember what the, it's on the Silver Sands property.
There's a day school there where you may remember years ago they built
I
a
thought the Silver
swimming
Sands
pool.
property originally belonged to the city of Fort Walton.
It was. They actually,
They originally did donate that to us.
that's correct.
Did we have any kind of restrictions back to them on that or not?
I don't know. I haven't looked at those deeds in a long time. But that was an operational school that they were running, and they actually deeded the whole thing back to us. The 4 acre parcel that I'm talking about is, it's got a retention pond on the back side of it. It's got the arc on the front of it. They just built a pool on the other corner. And so there's not a lot of usable property left there. There's not 4 acres of usable property there. Mary Esther Elementary School, we've all been in front of it and we've looked at it. The parcel of land it's sitting on is probably only about 55% of the property. We own the property all the way through to Hollywood Boulevard. We own all the frontage on Hollywood Boulevard. So probably 40.
Be sure and tell the board what that property
It's
is.
it's
It's
wetlands.
a ravine that's about 200 feet deep. But,
It's very wet.
and we've had proposals in the past for people wanting to buy it simply so they could swap it to the state because of the environmental situation, and that's where we have had some offers in the past to buy all of that across there from builders so they were going to do a land swap with that, and that's really on the value to it.
Yeah, it would probably be only thing being good for is wetland mitigation property. We own about 6 acres on the Choice site. The property that's vacant to the right side of Choice where it's been cleared out there, that property goes all the way to the back. It kind of narrows to get toward the back, but all of our property is not cleared.
This is Okaloosa Technical College on
Yeah.
Lewis. Okay.
Yeah. We also, as you're coming into Meigs Middle School, all the vacant clay area on the right, we own all those lots once you pass the Shalimar Library. And that's all I have unless you have questions.
Bill, before you sit down, I thought we owned some lots across the street from Edge Elementary School at one time.
We-
And then I also thought we had a lot or two in a subdivision here in Niceville somewhere. For some reason, I thought they had dedicated, am I crazy about, but for some reason, and I thought we used to own 2 or 3 lots right across from Edge Elementary that someone had donated to.
We own the property where the playground is.
Okay,
Now, I don't know about any lots, but I didn't list that because we're using it actively right now.
okay.
The lots you're talking about, probably in the late 90s, we had a number of parcels of land in the Pinecrest plats that were just on the plat as school property, but we didn't have a deed. But it had been on the tax rolls for years belonging to us. So we got with the people that were the original landowners of those plats, and we did some property exchanges with board approval that the parking lot at Valpy Elementary School where the Little League
Right.
did not belong to us. We got that, and we relinquished our claim on some properties that were, actually one of them was been part of a corner of a cemetery and some other places.
Yeah, there's in the middle of a subdivision.
In the middle of subdivision or also in the corner of a cemetery.
Yeah,
That we really didn't have, I guess we could say we had a claim on. It would never had, title had never been transferred to us. So instead of trying to go wade through that, we swapped it out. Like for instance, we swapped with the other Ruckle family. If you're standing at home plate at the girls softball field at Niceville High School, there was a little tiny triangle there where the old Coast Highway used to go that we didn't own that triangle where, right there where the press box is sitting, we swapped that out for something else to clear up the deeds and titles.
I had one question, Dr. Lamar.
Sir.
Bill, is the Lowry place listed on our vacant land inventory?
It is not, because we still have people there.
That's what a point I would make. I think it's, I don't.
I
know
just
if it's-
brought it because I
Yep.
knew it may be a piece that might be discussed. Any other questions?
I would just ask if you could, the properties that you mentioned that you didn't, if you could at least give me a copy. I don't know if the other board members would like, just so I can have it with that.
Okay.
How you presented this.
The ones I mentioned that were separate from the vacant land, I'll put a packet together and email it out to everybody. But just aerial photographs of it. Okay?
Well, and also, leading up to this, to the Baker thing that we talked about last week, we're talking about how we're short on revenue coming in from the state. But looking at some of these properties, they look like there's some opportunities for us to generate revenue, whether we harvest the trees that are on them, or maybe look at some of the properties that really have no land, have no value to us, but we could generate some revenue. And I also understand about land banking. I understand that we want to hold on to some that we can maybe swap, but I mean, I see an opportunity for some revenue here. That would be something, we could look at.
And Ms. Callahan, Rita, you might want to interject to the board. If we do sell, as Mr. Bryan mentioned, if we would sell any land, you need to make sure we understand how that money, where it has to go back to. In other words, there's restrictions on what you can do with it, Mr. Bryan. Rita might want to, just kind of bring us up to speed on that.
Any property that you might sell would have to come back to the capital outlay fund and can only be used for capital expenditures.
Dr. White,
Yes, ma'am.
just to kind of add on to Mr. Bryant's comments, most of these parcels are under 40 acres, as you mentioned, but if I'm correct, that's roughly the minimum of acreage that would be needed if, money fell from the sky and we were able to build a school. And the minimum cost of a new elementary school, for example, is anywhere between $25 and $35 million. And the minimum cost for secondary schools is around $55 million. And knowing where we live and that majority of the land in Okaloosa County is owned by either the federal government or by some longtime families in the county, we're very limited on purchasing, in addition to lack of revenue to purchase, but there's not very many 40-acre sites available where we would need schools or need to replace schools. So in my mind, I would just want the board to remember that if we are ever going to get to a fiscal point where we could start to renovate or rebuild schools, we would most likely need to do that on existing sites. And so in order to do that, we might need some of these smaller parcels of land to temporarily locate students while an older school is bulldozed and a new school is built. So while the potential is there to create revenue from a sale, the revenue that will be created from some of the sale of some of these properties, number one, isn't going to come close to generating the type of revenue we would need to build a single school. But we also might need that land temporarily to house students or equipment and things of that nature.
Just a reminder, the Blue Water Bay, Destin Middle School, that property was acquired through a land swap. We swapped them the property on Carmel Drive that we owned. I'm sure Mr. Walker remembers that, which is a fairly large parcel of land, which is right behind Lowe's in Fort Walton. And that was probably the only way we could afford to get that site, is through a land swap and some more money. But it sure gives you a huge down payment when you've got something to swap with, and it also gives you a little more latitude of where you can go and what you can get.
But as Mr. Bryant mentioned, that like the 40 acres up north of Laurel Hill, there's not any way that we'll ever use it, need it, or anything because of where it's located. And I mean, most of the parcels that you described here today, truthfully, we'll never have any use for them because of where they're located. Either they're too small, or like the one parcel that's 40 acres. Truthfully, if any of you get in your car and drive up there, you'll see what I'm saying. You know, it's 100 years from now, I hate to say this, it's on still be, we'll never use it for any school site or anything. And you know, I agree with Mr. Bryant. Now, there's some of them at some point in time, if, you know, we had an option to be able to dispose of them at a decent price and then put them back in wherever. I mean, you know, like say the 40 acres, we got a couple of $100,000, $100,000, whatever it would be for it, and then we put it back in renovating an old school or something. And I mean, and you know, I know it, some people, and I think Mr. Destin's one of them, that, you know, whatever we own, we don't want to, you know, get rid of it, and we understand that. And you know, it's like our Blue Water property. I mean, you know, now yes, that's located in a place to where conceivably we might end up wanting to build a school there, but you know, it's kind of like, as times changing, like for instance now Eglin just turned around and turned loose an 80, 100 acre parcel right across the street from my house that they're on now, let them build almost a town. And it's kind of like, if we get ready to start having it one day, building a new school, I mean, I'm hoping we'll be able to go to Eglin and say, well, hey, you know, we need 40 acres for this, or, you know, this is way down the future. None of us will probably be around, but that, you know, that's a possibility. And it's like the Blue Water property, with all the needs we have, truthfully, if, you know, if we could get 5, 6, 7 million for it, it might well be that, you know, that would be good to do, to be able to meet our needs now. And we all understand, because truthfully, the Blue Water property really is not really conducive to put a school on, because if you go look at it where it's located, even though, yeah, at one time, you know, we had talk of actually going out there and building a new high school or either a middle school, and then converting the Ruckle and Niceville all into one school, simply because of when Niceville was originally built, it was built on too small a property. And then, you know, and originally, when if you go back and look, when the state used to be involved, is we was never supposed to have over 1,300 kids in Niceville High School because of the size of the property. Well, we all know what we have now. But, you know, again, and you know, when it comes to any property, if you think you're going to have a use for it in the future, but I agree with Mr. Bryant that some of this property, I mean, I hate to say this, it's never going to be used by us. And if somebody wants to buy it and have a use for it, and you know, as Ms. Gallion said, we have to put the money back in capital anyway. It's not like that we don't go buy textbooks or something like that with it.
And I agree, and I sort of have the same sentiment that Mr. Destin has in general. And we do never know what's going to happen. In fact, this week, some of the folks may have seen the article in the Panama City Herald, in which the St. Joe Paper Company now plans to build 130,000 homes north of 98 in the Rosemary Beach vicinity. And that's 130,000 homes. And that will be, in terms of school impact, that will be in Walton and Bay County, although that many folks, I mean, after all, the villages in South Florida only approximates about 30,000 homes. But the folks that will work in that area, they'll have children, and we certainly will experience some of the impact of that growth. I started to say spurt, but really it's something else in that portion of the Panhandle. So we do never know what happens, and I certainly never anticipated a development like that coming into this area. But St. Joe, they own a lot of land, as everybody knows. Anything else, board members?
One further
Yes,
comment,
sir.
Dr. Lamar. I agree with Mr. Tim that revenue, timber harvesting, whatever revenue sources, that's a good thing to do. But under general accounting principles, selling property is not a revenue source. That's taking your savings, not reoccurring revenue at all. Now, as we have all discussed, determining on an individual basis which of these parcels can never be used, that's a wise thing to do, but we need to be cautious about that. The size for an elementary school, I think, as I discussed with Mr. Chambers the other day, is more in the 25 acre rather than 40. So we don't want to cut off any options in the future. And I would caution that on an individual basis, we'll consider these parcels, hopefully, and make a determination.
And if I might add, Mr. Dustin, from just my single board member perspective, I would like to see what the plan would be to expend any of that revenue
Absolutely.
that might be generated. Not that we just take the revenue and then we spend it in whatever fashion may occur. I'd like to know what would be the application of that specific revenue.
Good.
Anything else, board members?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, Dr.
Thank
Smith.
you.
All right. Well, the good news is we have some property. All right, 7.4. Investigative Standards and Procedures, presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction. Board members, I think you've all had a chance to receive those and maybe have some discussions with members of the HR staff. Is there any questions or any thoughts or any need for further discussion here?
I guess I just,
Okay.
wanted to thank
Mr.
Mr.
Chambers, would you come up then? And Maxie too, and whoever else. Ms. Maxie?
Chairman, I just wanted to thank Ms. Maxey and her diligence in reaching out to professional practices, different district staff members, school board, community members to, create this document and, again, try to standardize procedures throughout the district. And in working with our administrators at our schools, coming up with forms and terminology and guidelines that will be useful for everybody to follow.
Thank you, Ms. Roche, and certainly I agree with that. And board members, colleagues, you see that this is not a voting item. This is information, and we certainly appreciate you providing this to us, Ms. Maxey, and Mr. Chambers.
Yeah,
Thank
It's a giant step forward on
Absolutely.
corralling our investigative procedures and making sure that everything's done in a manner that can't be questioned.
Agreed.
Thank you, Ms. Maxey. All right, 7.5, again, an information item. Pre-KD plan presented by Mr. Marcus Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction. Likewise, board members, I think you received some information here regarding the plan and some various scenarios regarding cost and so forth. Again, is there any question or comment or need for further information?
Well, I mean, it's not an action item as you've pointed out, Dr. White, but
Well, it could be, but at this
Right.
juncture, it's not.
So, you know, again, I wanted to thank Mr. Chambers and staff and the pre-KD parents who were present at our last board meeting for working together to come up with different opportunities, and the scenarios that are provided to us show the thought process that was involved in making the decision that was made, and that is planned. I would also just caution that it's hard to put an exact dollar figure. I know we've done our best as far as portable cost and other capital items, but in my discussions with Mr. Chambers and pre-KD parents, there's also indirect cost that affects the schools that are involved. If we were to keep pre-KD units where they are at their current locations, knowing the growth that is planned at those schools, it affects our master schedules at those schools. It affects our playground facilities. It affects our lunchroom scheduling, our extracurricular scheduling for music and art at the two schools that have those programs, recess. So there's a lot of other parts of this decision that aren't, necessarily indicated as far as a capital cost. And at some of our schools, I believe at Blue Water, we're almost pushing a 4-hour window for lunch, roughly between 10:15, I believe, and almost 2 o'clock. And every additional class that's added at our schools, we've got to factor 20 kids, 18 kids into that lunchroom master schedule and into those extracurricular schedules, and then our mandated recess and PE schedules. So that's something to consider in this. My understanding is that we also received a scenario that's different from the 3 presented from some pre-KD parents. Would you like to address that, or are you able to address that?
As it pertains to what would be scenario 4, there would have to be more conversations with that parent to get a clearer understanding of what that scenario is actually asking.
Now, let me make sure I understand. This is not a scenario that has been presented nor studied in depth by staff. This is a scenario being presented by a citizen.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And so that's why I think that.
No, sir. I did not include scenario 4.
Well, there may be multiple kinds of those scenarios that, as of yet, we may not even know about. I'm just saying that based upon my experiences with rezoning and the kinds of scenarios that would be presented on multiple cases. So I just wanted to know is that that's something that you guys are going to be looking at, but it's not one prepared by the staff.
Not prepared by the staff. But we do have our recommendation in terms of the scenario, like we shared when we spoke with each of you, and that scenario is scenario 2. And I do want to say, just like we shared, considerations. So we looked at considerations. So we looked at each of the schools in the central zone, the elementary schools. We looked at their current enrollment. We looked at their FTE projections. Blue Water, FTE projection-wise, is going up. PLU, FTE projection-wise, is actually going down about 20 students. And as I've spoken to Mr. Horton, as you know, when you look at master schedules, 20 students comprised across an entire school, that's not necessarily going to impact an actual classroom. And then EDGE is also projected to go up in enrollment as well. So when you look at the central zone in terms of its capacity in the elementary schools, right now, projected, there's 0 classroom space. So as we started talking about after the last meeting and looking at scenarios, so we also looked at rezoning, for example. So with board approval, we would look at exploring rezoning in the central area for the 2019-2020 school year, and then also exploring the possibility of would we need to build a school in the central zone. And these would be things that would be explored as we go into future months. So with all of that also being a part of the consideration, then we looked at those 3 scenarios. The scenario 1, like we shared, would be everything remains the same. The pre-KD units stay exactly where they are, and we talked about what some of those implications would be, and you have some of those implications on the budget attachment. And then scenario 2 is the actual scenario that we shared at the last board meeting, where the pre-KD units come to STEM. We have 9 classrooms there, so we have area to grow there, but we would also include a VPK there as well, so we would have inclusion as well. And just as added information, we contacted the state of Florida. In terms of Okaloosa County, we have 82.9% of our students are in inclusion, defined by the state of Florida. So that's just information for you. And then scenario 3, like we talked about, is the 2 units at Blue Water remain where it's located, the 2 units at Edge remain where it's located, and the unit at Plu remains where it's located. The unit at STEM stays, and then any future growth would also go to STEM as well. And in that scenario, there would also be a VPK. But you see the costs associated as well. So after all of the conversations with staff, with board members, with the parents, and then looking at implications and looking at cost, scenario 2 is the scenario that we have decided to go forward with.
And could you put that inclusion percentage in perspective for me?
So out of the 67 counties in the state of Florida, when you look at rankings, so to speak, I believe we are 13th in terms of an inclusion rate. And some are, like, we're 82.9, some are 83, 83.1. But we are 82.9, and it's 13th in the state.
Okay.
And in regards to Mr.
And
Chambers.
can I add one thing to that?
Okay,
I'm
sure.
sorry.
Mhm.
And they break it down by extra large counties, medium counties, and so forth. Of the medium counties, we're number 1 in terms of inclusion.
Interesting.
I'm sorry.
All right, that's
No.
what Thank you. Thank you.
And I mean, we're kind of on the low end of medium counties. I mean, a medium county could be 60 to 70,000 students, and we're about 30,000 students. In regards to, Plu, I just, when we say that Plu is projecting potentially a reduction of 20 students compared to this current school year, we're still bursting at the seams at Plu in that we have multiple classrooms in portables already at Plu. And I would also like to point out that the 3,000 home Deer Moss Creek development that is currently selling homes is currently zoned for Plu. So as it happens, that's just our projected enrollment, but every year we have people coming in after school's started, and as those homes start to sell, and if we assume that some of them will contain children, they're zoned for Plu.
And you're absolutely correct. And in our discussions, we talked about could Plu be flat in enrollment next year? They could be. And then in 2019-20, would we then start seeing the impact of Deer Moss Creek and going forward, which also is part of the discussions of maybe the immediacy of rezoning.
And there's also, if I'm correct, there's also still some homes being built off of Palm Boulevard in Niceville, which is also in Plu's zone. while I'm not sure if most of those lots have been sold, they're still constructing homes there. And again, those students would be directed to PLU. But, you know, as I stated at our last board meeting, I'm in agreement that we cannot continue to kick down the rezoning issue much further. I mean, we've heard about vacant land this morning. Parts of Edge Elementary are over 80 years old. PLU just celebrated their 50th anniversary. The STEM Academy is approximately 60 years old. Blue Water at our youngest school is over 27 years old. Ruckle is approaching 70 years, or it's over 60 years old. 60, 65. Nice. And Niceville High School is one of our you know, older high schools, with our youngest high school at Fort Walton Beach. So, and again, these kids have to go somewhere. In addition, just the inequity of the dual enrollment or dual transportation zones that reside only in the Niceville area, where we are dual zoned busing students to either Dustin Middle School or to Ruckle, or to Lewis School or to Ruckle for middle school students. And the scenario we have at Lewis for our middle school students, where because of lower middle school enrollment, we're not able to field some sports teams, some extracurricular activities, whereas kids are being turned away from those same types of activities at Ruckle because of the very heavy enrollment there. And then it goes on to curriculum too. What courses are we able to offer to students in middle school at Lewis versus some of the programs we're able to offer at Ruckle? And my understanding is that our enrollment at the STEM Academy, as far as that middle school enrollment, is relatively flat, if I remember correctly. You know, we've seen some variation over the last few years since the creation of that school, but no dramatic increase or dramatic decreases in that school enrollment. So rezoning is something that we will have to visit, especially with the development of Deer Moss Creek. All of those students are currently zoned for PLU and Ruckle, and there simply is no space for them if that neighborhood was to be filled up today. And I realize that won't happen, but we'll need to have plans for that.
And the only thing that I would add about this discussion concerning rezoning would be that should the superintendent recommend that we begin those kinds of discussions and that kind of process, I would like to see a demonstrated case describing the need for such a rezoning, accompanied by a timeline, so that the board members and the community have some idea to be associated with such an effort. So I would suspect at a later time then you would be bringing forth that kind of information, should that be the recommendation of the superintendent. Colleagues, any comment there?
Well, here's the thing. This VPK has kind of brought to light one thing. Most of you are too young, but what you have to realize is in the early 60s, when I came to this district, we had, in the south end of the county, we had 30% of our elementary kids in churches, okay? Well, folks, and I'm not going to be here, and Miss Rush probably won't be here. We'll be leaving in November. But what this has brought to light after talking to Mr. Horton and Mr. Chambers, folks, we're now back where we were when we had 30% of our kids in churches. The only reason we don't have right at this moment is back in the early 60s, you didn't have the portables available that was suitable to put kids in, and the money either. But now, we're now at this point, because you have to realize that used to, for instance, we'll take Edwards Elementary School. Well, at one time, we had 1,100 kids in Edwards Elementary School. Today, we have 500, and if this board and superintendent went today and told the principal we wanted to send her 100 kids, she'd go crazy and say, I have no room. We have, because of the change in the requirements, of the fact that used to where you had a school that could house 1,000, they lucky to house 500 anymore. That's part of the problem. Plus, our student population now is back. In the early 60s, we had 33,000 kids. We're now back there again, with virtually no more student stations. And after talking to Mr. Horton and Mr., like when I was visualizing, well, we'll send the 5th grade over to Destin Middle School. Well, Mr. Horton said, we got 8 sections in Blue Water alone. Well, I mean, and what this board's fixing to have to face, the superintendent, is, ladies and gentlemen, we're back to the church days. I hate to say this. I mean, I don't know what in the world that this board and superintendent's going to be able to do, because even what few stations we have now, even in Fort Walton area, is rapidly disappearing. But Niceville area now is as bad as the Crestview area. And I mean, we only have to face one thing. This VPK really brought to me to light is we're in a critical situation to where to next school year or the next, we all have to be going asking the churches to put our kids if they're, and either we got to find the money. Rita's gonna have to find the money to buy wholesale portables, or we gonna have to go ask somewhere for us to put the kids. That's how simple it is. And it's this VPK thing. Absolutely, I would love to be able to keep the kids where they are and in their current schools and stuff. But, after when I got through with talking to Mr. Horton, I realized one thing. We have no choice. There's no need being concerned, but what this has brought light to me, and I hope you other board members, we've got a real critical, serious problem, and the only way he's going to be able to meet it even temporarily is we only have to, hopefully Rita can find the money to buy 50 portables in the next year or two unless something happens. And that's the facts, folks. And because of the fact that not only do we now with so many more back with student level like it was in the 60s, but also where you had a school building that could house 1,000, now can't house 500. That's just the way it is.
Well, and that's all complicated by the class size of it.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what's created.
People don't realize
Right.
that, and
Right.
that, the fact that even though, yes, even if you had less students, the fact that you now have so many regulations that you can't put
Right.
so many kids
Right.
in certain type of classrooms,
Right.
and I'll shut up, but I think that we all need to realize that.
And I would just say, add to your crisis statement that, from 1955 to 1965, the county built all the schools that we have today. So now we're at the same situation, but we're in 60, 70-year-old buildings. So that, to me, it's even compounded because the buildings are to the point where we've band-aided them and maintained them to the best of our ability, but the infrastructure that we have in place is to the point that it's beyond repair, or it doesn't make sense to keep throwing good money at such old facilities.
And Ms. Rush, I think it's fair to say that it's not just the school system that has experienced this flush out, if you will, of growth. Yesterday, when I went to Crestview, I sat in traffic for about an hour, almost an hour and a half, going north on 85. And if you head east or west on 98, you're going to experience the same thing. So our basic infrastructure of Okaloosa County, from schools to highways to roads to water and sewer, coupled with new regulations and new requirements for water mitigation and all those kinds of things, we've really got some issues that we're all having to try to address. Mr. Destin, I think you got something.
One question, Ms. Chambers. Just so I'm clear, the course we're on is we're going to stay on the course that we were on previously. That's a recommendation, right?
Correct. After several conversations, after speaking with the parents again, after looking at very specific numbers on the budget, after speaking with the teachers again, so with all of that, that the recommendation is scenario 2.
Okay, and you convinced me thoroughly that we have a space problem. I have no doubt about that. My question is, faced with that situation, do we have any guidance from state law or federal law as to which students we move? I mean, we have a choice of moving the ESE kids or non-ESE kids. Is there any guidance from the law that tells us one should get a priority over the other?
I do not know of any such guidance.
Mr.
And neither do I. It's just a matter of being sure you're in compliance with the moves you make, but I don't know of any priority guidance on that.
In compliance to what?
Simply as they're working now, they've added an inclusion unit over there, and there is no other prohibition though on moving those students around.
Okay, well now, adding an inclusion unit to me appears to be addressing the spirit of the law without really addressing the details, but that's a debate for another time. I understand the reason you made your decisions and I respect them, so we'll move forward.
Marcus, the thing I want to be sure that we're looking at your cost analysis is I was concerned about the cost of moving to the STEM center, and because one thing Rita has preached to me all these years is one thing, is I'd rather be high with our numbers than low, and I'm very concerned, and when I went over and looked at the STEM center and with the kind of kids we're sending there, is when I went, and it's been quite some time since I was there, but I want to make sure that those, you know, the restrooms and all those kind of things, and I just thought that number looked mighty low to me, but now, because here's one thing about it, this board and the superintendent, all of us, is I'd rather us go into it with a little extra money than not enough, and then have to be coming back with change orders and all this kind of stuff. And do you feel comfortable? I mean, it just looked low to me with that number, because I know if you get into trying to do an ESE bathroom, I can tell you, you're talking $25,000 or $30,000 immediately. And you know, when we looked at doing those 2 rooms and all that kind of stuff, and I just, do you feel comfortable with those numbers?
I feel comfortable after speaking with Mr. Koutsaradis yesterday.
You know, I mean, I'd rather you tell this board it's gonna be 80,000 rather than 50, and then we have to keep coming back up front. And I'm just, when I look at that number, it just looks low to me unless there's something been done that I'm not aware of.
Well, Mr. Walker and the board, and Superintendent Steve Bolton and I went to the STEM Academy this morning before the meeting, and we went into the into the bathrooms. The only thing that still needs to be done into the ESE wing is we are prepped for the smaller toilets, and those toilets are going to be put in here this summer. But other than minor touching up and painting, that's the only thing. And when I say minor, just a few patches and painting areas. That's all that we need to do. Is we are ADA accessible. We have to change a few locks because you have to have the handle locks and just a few things like that. but we do not anticipate a large amount of
Well,
cost
the
there.
bottom line is, are you comfortable with what your numbers are and us being adequate to have it fixed the way it should be for these kids? That's
Yes.
all, that's all I
Yes,
want to know.
with the bathrooms, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you
Yes.
know, that's it.
Well, I mean, just to add to your concern though, there isn't, you know, while the cost may be minimal, there is cost, and we don't, you know, we have $5,000 in for internet access and fencing, but we don't have, you know, $5,000 or $2,000 in for desks, you know, lunchroom tables. The only other issue, I know that ESE wing obviously housed ESE students when it was Valparaiso Elementary School, and I understand, you know, you're putting in the lower toilet seats. But my understanding is there'll be pre-KD students at the other end as well. And
Right.
those classrooms, just because I had kids in those classrooms, have bathrooms in them. Have we looked at
Yes.
the restrooms in those facilities? And I mean, if I remember, you know, the ADA compliance, the low seat toilets, there were some, what's the right term for, not recessed seating, but the flooring in some of the classrooms in there kind of had reading areas where there was a step-down area.
Right. Well, before we put the first unit of pre-KD in the ESE area, all the bathrooms were compliant. We made that change, so that's been done.
Right, with
And
the
then-
unit that's already there.
Right, and so we are in the process of swapping out the toilets in the other area.
Okay, so you're
Yeah,
talking about
yes.
the other area, not the ESE wing?
Correct, that's already been
Okay.
done.
Okay. So the only restrooms that we're talking about are in that former kindergarten, first
Right.
grade area?
And we're making those changes now.
And HVAC issues, because again, that facility, I know we
Yes.
replaced the main unit there.
Yeah, it's in the process. This summer, it'll be changed out. The main small chiller is actually what it is, but that was budgeted with the capital plan at the beginning of this FY by the board.
If I also remember correctly, there was a water fountain on the outside of that unit, on the outside of that building that kind of went to a playground area over there. And any playground costs we have are just for the playground that's behind the front office area, essentially.
ESE does
But we don't have any plans right now for playground equipment on the other end, correct?
Not currently. We have a proposal for a swing that was at Blue Water, but that's all waiting to be decided upon. But there's
It's in
no
your
no
estimate.
additional playground.
But if we're adding nine classrooms, I mean, is that something, you know, as Mr. Walker's suggesting, that we need to plan for in the cost?
So we talked with Ms. Gal and Mrs. Jackson about the other side.
Right.
And for the 2018-19 school year, the playground that we have in place right now, plus the swing that's going to be added, that would be for the 2018-19 school year. As we get into the 2018-19 school year and looking towards 2019-20, we discussed, after we talked with the teachers, do we need more playground space? And then 2019-20 is when we would look at, do we need a playground on the opposite side?
And you, in fact, might, based upon further growth.
Correct.
Okay.
I asked Mr. Chambers in our meeting how much money we've already spent on this project. You told me approximately 50,000.
Right, it's on the item under the note.
$58,766.63.
And we're projecting we're gonna spend some more.
$51,214.97.
So we're up to around 109,000.
About 109,000, yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
All right, board members, anything else on this one?
Just water,
Yes, ma'am.
just water fountains in the area, just to double check that they're ADA compliant.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rush. All right, board members, let's go ahead and move on the consent agenda items. 8.1, approval of the consent agenda. 8.2, approval of the minutes of the workshop meeting of May 10, 2018, minutes of the regular meeting of May 14, 2018, recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.3, appropriation of District 1 School Board capital outlay funds to Pryor Middle School for classroom furniture in the amount of $10,229.12, presented by Lamar White and recommended by the superintendent for approval. 8.4, appropriation of District 3 School Board member capital outlay funds to Mary Esther Elementary School for 9 security cameras and DVR in the amount of $7,000, presented by Mr. Walker and recommended by the superintendent for approval. Excuse me, yes ma'am.
Dr. White, I just had on 8.4 and 8.5.
Sure. Okay.
I know we are currently, Superintendent Jackson, are we in the process of doing a security assessment at all of our campuses? And my understanding is that is currently underway. And while I certainly, can't directly object to board member capital discretionary funds being used to purchase security cameras, I'm just wondering if it would be more beneficial to the district as a whole if we find out what our DVR security camera needs are district-wide and present those scenarios, if you will, or options to the board. I know we're planning on having a capital budget workshop this summer, but I also know the needs at the schools are urgent and obviously prefer to have systems in place at a minimum prior to the start year. But in order to possibly get a better usage of our funding sources, how far along are we in that assessment to where are we within a couple of weeks of knowing what our security camera needs are district-wide? Or, have we done the south end, the central zone, the north zone, so that we can, maybe the district can come to the board and say, instead of individual schools doing it that way, say, we have $60,000 of needs in the north zone. And do we have the funding source, whether it's from capital discretionary funds or if we want to allocate other revenue for that?
We've been meeting monthly since the last school shooting in Parkland, and Mr. Horton can address the camera situation a little better. That falls more into his department. As far as us assessing the schools, we are planning on the second week of June to have representatives from the military and their anti-terrorism force and our SROs, along with Steve Bolton and I. We are going to assess, we're going to take that second week of June and we'll be assessing all of our schools. And so we'll be looking at single point entries, we'll be looking at fencing needs. And we have been discussing our communications via radio and also camera needs. And so I'm going to defer to Steve on the radios and the cameras. But as far as the other, we're planning on that second week of June to assess the facilities.
Hey, board members, I'm going to provide some overarching comments, and then if you need to speak to Dustin or Eric a little bit. Two things are going on right now in the district. One of them involving radios at the schools. So we are developing a district-wide radio procedures and network that's going to allow for access throughout the district. And so Dustin can speak to that, but it's something where we are working to make sure we're in FCC compliance in some areas. We had some situations where folks could be off of campus and through scanners and things like that pick up the discussions that are going on in schools on school radios. We're moving to digital radios, a standardized radio across the district which encrypts what is being said, and so it makes it much more difficult, if not impossible, for folks off campus to hear what's going on. We're working closely with the Sheriff's Department with regard to the radios and standardizing that so that they're programmed so that, for example, an SRO that comes to a campus to respond to something, there will be a single emergency channel for everybody to go to so that everyone can talk within that zone. So there's a lot of detail involved in that, but that's ongoing right now. We actually have folks going out to the schools to reprogram our current radios, make sure that they're of the kind that can be used, and moving forward that plan this summer to standardize all of that. As it relates to the camera systems, Dustin Keith has been doing a great job to get our schools standardized on cameras, because you might remember a time where every school kind of was on their own and going out and looking at vendors and getting camera systems that work for them. We have been standardizing our camera system for the past few years. We're about 90% of the way there. We just did have a meeting this week with the vendor to kind of go through what it would take to push this over the end line to get it done. That's something we really want to do this summer. The other piece involved with standardizing our camera systems is networking in the Sheriff's Department. And so what we're looking to be doing, and we've got a plan to complete that work this summer, is to have someone at dispatch at the Sheriff's Department on a computer being able to log in securely and see, in the event of a crisis, to be able to see camera feeds. Okay, and so those kind of things are things that the Sheriff's Department has told us that video on camera systems that's after the fact of any particular a crisis or incident does not help prevent. So they need to be able to see and respond to in real time. So we'll work on that process as well. And we'd be happy to come back and report to you a little bit later this summer about that. But we've had those meetings going on, and we are looking at that standardization piece.
So the items that are on the agenda are part of that plan.
They
so
are.
in other words, we're not buying equipment that's just a replacement of what we have. It's repair or replacement of equipment to go along with that future plan.
Exactly right. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And then in regards to the radios, will that include transportation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
One of the things that's going to be happening with the radios this fall, I'm not speaking out of turn, I think, is those radios, those digital radios that we'll be putting out actually have GPS in them. And so, at least from the transportation dispatch piece, they'll be able to identify where that radio is at any moment in time. It's not something that's a GPS that's going on the bus, but it'll be that radio. So that's something we're
interrupt
working
just a
towards.
minute. I think we need to be a little cautious with how much detail about security systems are being disclosed. I mean, it's one thing to talk about the topics, but I'd encourage you to brief members separately if you're going to get into specific operational details of these security systems.
Okay.
Well, and I know, just as a matter of record, that the Sheriff's Department has moved into digital transmissions. So that kind of information is certainly public information now. Anyone that has a scanner knows that, because it's something you can't pick up all that stuff. So
Yes, sir.
But thank you for your comments, Mr. Horton.
All right.
Anything else, board members?
I just want to follow up immediately after the shooting in Parkland. That Thursday workshop, I did make a request that we go throughout the entire district, buses, administration, schools, to do a study on seeing how our camera systems were they functioning properly and all that. And I know, Ms. Jackson, you had sent me an email not too long ago saying that was you were still working on that. Would that be something that would be presentable when we do come before for our budget to see, like Ms. Thrush said, to see where our needs are so we can get those
Or
fixed?
if it's assessed individually with board members, or just shared individually with board members?
Certainly for budget purposes, those general discussions would be appropriate, but you don't want to start publishing a list of which camera's where and which camera's functioning and where the repairs are.
Correct. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. All right, then, so we've talked all around 8.4 and 8.5, appropriation of District 4 School Board Member Capital Outlay Funds for Okaloosa STEM Academy for security camera repairs in the amount of $6,871.16, presented by Mr. Bryan and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.6, Budget Amendment Number 8, Fiscal Year 2017-2018, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.7, Monthly Financial Statement for April 2018, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.8, Invoices to be approved for payment, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.9, School Donations, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.10, Payroll Warrant Register and Accounts Payable Warrant Register for April 2018, totaling $26,582,390.88, and bank transfers for April 2018 totaling $26,385,010.69, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.11, Mental Health Assistance Project, new categorical for fiscal year 2018-29, state mandated, presented by Mrs. Scallon, Chief Financial Officer, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And board members, I would point out this item is also accompanied by some, I believe, job descriptions later on. Any discussion?
Well, Dr. White, just, for the public, if I understand Ms. Scallon correctly, this is part of, our allocation that's categorized that we're receiving from part of the Stoneman Douglas Act, some of the requirements of that legislation, and then some of the funding that required that we have these positions. And you've kind of outlined the cost of those positions, and we're hopeful that this will be a recurring categorical revenue source. But the revenue is here for this upcoming school year to create these positions. And I know you've worked with Ms. Schroeder and on creating these positions, and then you've also put in the distributions that were required to distribute out to the charter schools in our area. But is there any concern that you have about the funding? Obviously, we don't have enough funding to create a counselor at every location. So we've taken the funding that we've received and tried to just see what we can create based on the funding we've received. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. What's happened is typically this is a categorical, which means that it has to be used for a specific purpose. It's for the 18-19 year, and typically it would be in with the 18-19 budget as we move through that process this summer. The reason it's being put on the agenda is because there's a compressed timeline that we have to meet as a school district, a mental health plan, and in order to facilitate developing our plan, presenting it to y'all, and being able to hire the appropriate positions that we're going to propose in that plan, we would need to have the ability to do that prior to the preliminary
budget,
and tentative at the end of July, because this has to be done like by August 1st. So that was the reason that I put that on there now, to get that permission to go ahead and move forward with recruiting and looking for those types of individuals, because of course there's going to be a high demand on the market, and it's my understanding that that those particular types of individuals with those skills, there's not an abundance out there in the market, and so that is the reason. And so I've put in tentatively what's been proposed in positions, and I know what I will have to give to the charter schools. Now, when we do the preliminary and tentative budget, then of course this will come back to you, and if there's any supplies or anything, because I have there's an amount in the reserve line, then that will all be in there definite, and then you'll get to look at it one more time and approve it again.
Okay.
And I would just follow up, Ms. Thrush, because I have numerous concerns about this particular item. Some of them are at the state level, and some of them are at the local level. I mean, first of all, this is an entirely new endeavor for the school district to even be involved in, certainly at this scale. I think it's important for the public to understand that this particular categorical this year, and I know that you don't like it when I rough out the numbers, but I think for Okaloosa County, this categorical approximated a little bit less than $1 million. How much was it exactly? I think 800.
Total, it was $805,000, and of that we had to share with the charter school, so we actually get about $760,000.
So just rough it out, say just shy of $1 million that is a significant categorical appropriation to our school district. My concern at the state level is that will we see this funding again? Or will we see a reduced amount? And should we add district personnel, what do we do with personnel that we've added because we had a one-time windfall and then we suffered a reduction? And I know, Mr. Walker, I think you've counseled that in the past, whenever the money goes away, our position has been that the positions go away. So I'm greatly concerned about that. The second item pertains to exactly what Board Member Thrush had to say regarding guidance counselors. You know, the school district, the school board provides funding, not enough, for guidance counselors, but upon inquiry, we were informed that those dollars could not be used to pay for guidance counselors. That
Correct.
this legislation was specific, that we had to actually employ mental health counselors, as if our guidance counselors don't sometimes provide relative services. And so that concerns me a little bit. Yes, ma'am. Go
And
ahead.
Dr. Ward, I just want to make sure that my understanding is that our, the development of our mental health plan, we will have to have in there skilled personnel that have the area of expertise of mental health, not necessarily a particular type of position.
Yep, I agree. And I saw, and you folks in personnel and HR did a good job in breaking out those specific job descriptions with the kinds of requirements that you're talking about that are included actually in the verbiage in this 106-some page legislative endeavor. So those are concerns that I have. The only other concern that I have, I'm just curious, did we consider the possibility in this scenario at this time with this categorical that we don't yet know if we'll be funded again, did we look at the possibility of contracting these services as opposed to actual employment decisions where we bring people on board as a district staff?
And to answer that question, I would have to defer to the area that is that's handling this.
Okay.
Terry.
Thank you, Ms. Rhoda.
As Ms. Scallon mentioned, there's a higher level of licensure that's required for what we're looking for. In meeting with Mrs. Jackson and Officer Venuti, we looked at our program and decided that we wanted to go with the licensed mental health counselors. That's the highest you can get as far as the counselor position, I guess you can say. So licensed meaning that they can perform different job roles. For example, the licensed mental health counselor, the licensed clinical social worker, the licensed marriage and family therapist can actually Baker Act people. They are statutorily able to do that. So one of the things that we had talked about is that collaboration piece with our SROs. That's why we wanted to go with the highest level we could, plus the assessment skills, the other things that are required, as you saw in the statute. Yes, we did look at contracting. There's not a lot available with our contracting agencies on the licensed side of it. They will contract, I mean, there's a few, but not to the numbers that we need. There are master's levels or bachelor levels, but those also require supervision by the licensed person. And so we're still going to need licensed people to provide that supervision. At this point, I think in our district we have 2 licensed clinical social workers, and that's it. That's on the ESE side of the house, and they don't cross over as far as roles go. So I did look into it. There, of course, every company is going to say, oh yeah, we can provide that, but we have to wait for them to advertise. They say that they don't get a lot. Same thing with our school psychologist piece. We've looked at contracting that side as well, and they're just not out there in our area. So,
And speech therapist.
yeah,
And OT.
occupational therapist,
and
PT. Yes, sir. So I understand. I have the same concern you do.
I'm sure.
Because you hire people, you bring them in, they perform a service for us, and actually a significantly needed service, as you can tell, in our state and in our country. I have that same concern. Like you, I have to trust that the legislature is going to do the right thing and continue something that they've mandated. for us to continue to do. But finally, we get something that they're saying in law, and they're giving us a little money for it. I just hope they, like you, continue to give us the money for it.
Any further comments or questions about that for Ms. Roeder? She'll be the one that will shepherd this new endeavor.
Well, and again, I just, to kind of piggyback on your concerns and concerns that I discussed with Ms. Schroeder, we are not mental health facilities. We are educational facilities. So even in the process of hiring mental health counselors who are certified, we will be referring students and families to services.
Yes, ma'am.
We won't necessarily be providing services to families on our campuses.
That is correct.
But to me, it's a certified person who has the ability to be a liaison, not just with law enforcement, but with our mental health providers in our community.
That is correct. We're also, as part of this plan, we're looking at the state recognizes Bridgeway in our county as the mental health provider for our county. So we're looking at contracting with Bridgeway to provide those treatment services if the student doesn't already have a private physician, a local provider to provide that. So we're also looking at that as part of our mental health plan that's due to the state on August 1st, which they have given us no real template or parameters on what they're expecting.
Oh, is that because this is the first time we've
yeah,
done that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, it's every county in the state right now is dealing with this same situation, how we're going to handle that and what is the expectation of this legislation. So in answer to your question, we are not going to become a treatment center. We are educators. Our goal and our responsibility is to educate students. My vision for this plan that we're going to put in place is to remove barriers for those children to that academic success. They will not be doing treatment in schools, our people. Now we will contract, or we're considering contracting as we are now with Children's Home Society in some of our schools as they come in and they are doing some of those treatments already. But our people aren't going to do that. They're going to crisis intervene. They're going to provide counseling on a lower level than treatment. Again, building those relationships with those kids who have those very difficult situations, home environments, traumatic events in their lives, that kind of thing. The licensed person will be able to recognize this student is more than we can handle, and we'll have that conversation with the parent about getting that child treatment or referring them to Bridgeway, their private provider, those types of agencies that provide mental health services as well.
And Ms. Roeder, just having some experience in the field regarding this
Yes,
kind
sir.
of thing, I'm assuming that your plan will provide various kinds of protocols or guidance as to how that occurs
Yes, sir.
in a school setting.
Yes, sir.
Involving children and teachers and the family. And I mean, there's a whole host of issues in my mind, Mr. McInnes, that will come your way as well regarding notification and the legalities associated with all of that.
And there are regional meetings being held this summer by the DOE to specifically address. I'm attending one in June, the 20th and 21st, hopefully to get some more guidance from the Department of Education about what their expectations are for implementing this new law.
And I would just add, I mean, while it is $750,000, it's, still approximately 11 total positions. We have 40 facilities. Our high schools have 2,000 students roughly. While it's a significant amount of money for this upcoming school year, it still wasn't enough to place a health counselor at every location, and
That's
so our plans are to staff these positions how we're already having to spread out
Yes, ma'am.
other staff members
That is
that,
correct.
you know, we just mentioned. So they'll kind of be in zones, coverage zones, if
Yes,
you
ma'am.
will.
We call them itinerants, where they go from school to school. And of course, you know, crisis intervention, you know, that's why we're going to try to keep them in certain zones so that, let's say, a crisis does come up or a student does need, you know, immediate attention, collaboration with those SROs for those kids that, you know, they're looking at for involuntary examination, keeping them close enough that they can get to those schools very quickly to intervene or to assist in those situations. So they'll be from school to school. Yes, ma'am.
And as far as financing this and receiving the money from the state, we live with this every year. We have to live within the budget they send us. We don't control the budget, but this was very clear that this was a mandate. These are the things that we were going to have to do. They may pull every dime of it next year, but they've pulled every dime of other things before. So it's just part of what we have to live with as a school district. So do I hate hiring people and having to let them go? Probably more than anyone. However, we are directed that we will do this, and so we've moved forward. And what I think, in working with Terry and Rita and looking at other school districts' plans, I think this is a very good plan. Just like speech therapists have to travel all over the place, we're mandated to have speech therapists, but we never have enough money in our budget for ESE. Rita, am I correct on that? Never, ever do we ever get enough money. So I appreciate this, Terry, and I appreciate how hard you've worked on this, and I know you and I have had several conversations about this program, but it's just the world we live in, folks. There's never enough money. We never know what we're going to get. It's like rolling the dice every year, and that's what we do. And I'm going to a very important graduation, so you'll excuse me.
Yes, ma'am. And I would just say that regarding the categorical, it's important that everyone understand this is legislative direction.
Yes.
This is nothing that the school district has done. This will happen in all 67 school districts because of legislative law. Okay?
And I did just want to say one more thing. The legislature did not give us this money. This money basically came out of what we would have gotten as a regular increase in our BSA. That's why we were getting 47 cents. While I understand why,
I understand.
it's not like extra money that they gave us.
Let me see if I can say it in my layman's terms. This is money that would have come to the school district to be used for other needs, other recurring costs, but instead the legislature gave us the money, but then told us how we are required to spend it.
In a nutshell, yes.
Right. Very good. Thank you. All right. So moving on. 8.12. ITB 18-15 replacement generator for the Nutrition Center in Niceville, Florida, presented by Mr. Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
I have one or two questions,
I
Chairman.
anticipate.
Mr. Wyndham? How many KW is this generator?
I don't have that information with me. Steve, you may know. It's the one over, it's at the end of the building down here.
It is a big one.
And I know we're going from diesel powered to LP, I believe.
In order to make an analysis of whether this price is good or not, we would need to know what size it is. And just, you know, doing my homework, I couldn't find that, so that's why I'm
We
asking
can
the
get that
question.
information to you. I can tell you that there was a pre-bid estimate of around $135,000
Okay.
for this
And,
project.
did we get more than one bid on this?
We just got the one on time. We had a second bidder that was late. It was a local bidder that we were not able to accept that.
Yeah. And is it installation, I take it, the generator and the installation?
Yes, sir.
And the reason I ask these questions are, this is a rather large sum of money, almost 142,000. And we only get one bidder. You know, I wonder why or how that happens. And, you know, that makes me very apprehensive. And I don't know what size the generator is. You can get that information
We can get that
for me.
information back to you.
Yeah, this is a subject that I do have some personal knowledge about. I buy them and use them all the time, and I know what they cost. So I'm curious to get that information if you would get it for me. And
Sure.
then I can discuss some more with you on Monday, or Tuesday, excuse me.
If I may, our electrician did look at the load that it would require and made sure that this generator would accommodate it, plus a little bit more. It supports the freezers, the large freezer, all that in case of a power outage. So that's why it has to be as large as it is. And like as it tends to be happening a lot lately, we get estimates from certain vendors, and in this case, the one we had a dependable person we've used in the past, forgot about it, was the words. So we can't babysit them in the bid process. We have to depend on them.
It. We have these same type generators at our freezer plant in Destin, and so I know what the capacities need to be and what they should cost. Just curious, so I can, you know,
I can send you the entire ITV packet. I mean, it's public now, so I just see the whole packet. You can see
That's
all
what
the
I was
stuff.
just gonna suggest, that when we, you know, when a bid is awarded, if it's possible to send a link to the, you know, like you said, once it's closed, if it's able to be posted. I mean, I know you post the bids online.
Yeah, they're out there on our website
Yeah,
all the
so we
time,
can just, so the public can see when they go to board docs in one location, as Mr. Dustin is saying, you know, parts versus labor and what's making up the 142. But I know,
Scope,
I know you always post everything on the purchasing site, and, you know, just for the public, they can go out there and look what's been put out for bid, the bids that we receive, and a breakdown that's already out there. But just maybe if a link can be added in board docs, so that if a member of the public was just looking at board docs and didn't know that you already do a great job on the purchasing site of posting
We
that
can
to
do
the
that,
public.
or
So-
actually attach the document.
Okay.
Either way.
That would be a good idea.
Okay.
And the compulsion for replacement is, we need more service, or is age of life, or? I mean,
Age of life.
Okay,
Yes,
got
sir.
it, got it, it's time.
This unit's about the size of a small vehicle.
Yeah,
It's
I
pretty
bet.
sized.
Yeah, they're big, and I would only point out one other issue that I had. I went to the disasters, Andrew, in Miami and Katrina over in the other direction, and in each case, I found that natural gas had been disrupted. I don't know that it will happen up here in Niceville, but natural gas was not available for a week or two over in Biloxi and that area. And so I'm not sure switching from diesel, it's a lot easier. You have to have diesel available, and you have to go find it and have tanks. It's difficult. But natural gas generators in Biloxi, that was a joke. All the natural gas lines were ruptured, and they had to turn all the natural gas systems off, at least in the area of disaster. So, a thought.
And that was my only question. What was the reasoning behind that? You know, was that part of the bid requirements that it be natural gas versus diesel, or we just left it up?
Internally, we do not have the transportation capabilities to go fill up the numerous diesel generators that we already have. And so in our experience in the past, the last big one, Ivan, Okaloosa Gas, was not disrupted. So we're taking that experience and applying it. We've been
This far away from
Yes, sir.
the Gulf, that may work, but the bay's right over there.
Yes, sir, I understand. But the other part of it, we don't have the capability to transport large quantities of diesel fuel that these tanks require.
So we've never used that generator and transported diesel to it?
I'm not, well, we have it, the
I
only time we.
understand what you're saying. I'm
Yes,
just
sir.
telling you,
It-
gas is not, sometimes, it's just, you know, you got a generator that you can't use, which defeats the purpose of having a generator.
Yes, sir.
I tell you what, there is another way to address that, and that is to have a conversion unit where you can use LP gas, and you could go get a tank or have a tank on site that you can just switch and use LP rather than natural gas, you might want to look into that.
Okay, we'll take that into consideration.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Destin. Appreciate the insight, and thank you, gentlemen. All right, so moving on, 8.13. I knew it was a long agenda when I looked at it. Tag on bid, SDOC-18B073LH, large equipment catalog discount presented by Mr. Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.14, tag on bid over $25,000, proposal for replacement of Power 720 AS400 server, presented by Mr. Wyndham, Program Director Purchasing, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.15, waiver of the OCEA master contract requested by the Okaloosa Technical College to waive the standard school calendar for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Mr. Jerry Sansom, Principal, Okaloosa Technical College, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.16, waiver of the OCEA master contract requested by Riverside Elementary to waive the sharing of grade level chair supplements with one or more teachers for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Ms. Tammy Matz, Principal, Riverside Elementary, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.17, request to advertise a public hearing for revision of School Board Policy 1-21, Wellness Policy, presented by Ms. Lisa Sunday, Insurance Ombudsman, Risk Management, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Thrush?
Well, Ms. Sunday's here. It's just
Yes, ma'am. Come forward, Ms. Sunday, if you have something. Board members, any questions or comments?
You may remember, based on requirements by the U.S. Department of Agriculture through the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 and the corresponding Florida statutes, the current Okaloosa County School District Wellness Policy was revised, which is Board Policy 121, and it was adopted at the October 24th school board meeting. One of the requirements in Florida statutes is an annual review by school board and community stakeholders to update the policy if necessary. We completed this review on May 1st at the School Health Advisory Committee meeting and made the following revisions, and I think you have copies there redlined. On the first page, which is page 24 on your copy, we changed annual to triennial in the report on goals and objectives after we researched federal and state statutes and determined no requirement for annual reporting. However, at the end of 3 years, which I think would be 2020, the committee is required to complete a compliance assessment to measure the progress in achieving the goals and objectives set forth in the policy and report the findings to the board. Second change would be on the 5th page, which is page 28. The section on the Healthier U.S. School Challenge was removed as this program is going to be discontinued at the end of this year. It ends on June 30th. After renumbering that section, the only other change is the phrase mental health services was added to the health services section. This is to reflect the assistance allocation that we just spoke about from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Safety Act, which became effective on March 9th. We're requesting to advertise a public hearing so that Section 121 of School Board Policy can be updated to reflect these changes. Any
Very good, very good.
problems or questions?
All right, any questions, board members, or comments about that? And so you're looking for a motion to advertise that public hearing, and that will be part of the consent agenda.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Ms.
Thank
Sunday.
you. Going off to give fit feet checks.
Okay. All right. All right, 8.18, motor vehicle lease for disaster transportation services between the School Board of Okaloosa County and Belvedere Commons of Fort Walton Beach, presented by Mr. Jay McInnes, Program Director of Transportation, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 8.19, school fire and life safety inspection reports for all Okaloosa County School District facilities for 2017-2018 to be presented to the State Fire Marshal, presented by Mr. Bolton, Director of Facilities Planning and Maintenance, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Rush.
Just wanted to thank Mr. Jamerson. I mean, 140 pages, and again, certainly to go through all of our facilities and classrooms, and again, because of the aging facilities that we have, You know, this requires a lot of work on the inspector's part, as well as staff at each school facility to make sure they're in compliance. And certainly we're mandated to have so many fire drills and safety drills of different kind that also assist in us making sure that emergency lighting, communications, sprinklers, et cetera, systems are working or communicating effectively with our fire department. So just wanted to thank Mr. Jameson and all his efforts. In the future, if there's any way to put any findings like in a summary, you know, so that we can address those quickly or discuss those, but I appreciate all the work that goes into this document.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, board members? Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Thrush and Mr. Jameson. Let's go ahead and move now to item 8.20. Extension and modification of memorandum of agreement between Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and the School Board of Okaloosa County for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Mr. Steve Horton, Assistant Superintendent MIS, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
Just a quick question.
All right, Mr. Horton and Mr. Guerrero, would you come forward, please?
Yes.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for letting me be here.
You're welcome. The extension sometimes gets confused between Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and Embry-Riddle World.
Worldwide.
Okay, so these are not two separate entities, they're the same.
They're the same. We have a three-legged stool. We are Daytona Beach, Prescott, and Worldwide. Our worldwide campuses are all of our satellite campuses throughout the world, besides our two residential campuses, but we operate all of them the same, under the same leadership and the same policies and procedures.
Okay, and I noticed that it's sort of a 17,000 approximately increase, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how does that happen?
Well, there's a slight increase in tuition per course, and then last year we began at Laurel Hill School some remote coursework for students up there, and allowed students to have real-time access through technology for courses that were run in the south end of the county. Embry-Riddle provided scholarships for those students, so they were able to take those courses tuition-free, and we greatly appreciate that. Those were a one-year scholarship, so this year that increase in cost you're seeing is essentially those scholarships for those students not available this year.
Okay, so we're actually getting more of a program than we were.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I may just add to that comment, we exceeded our contract amount last year, and I just could not say, no, you're not accepted into our program. So I went back to the president and our chancellor and said, we are exceeding our capacity, and I do not want to say no. How do we determine who is going to be in this program or not? And they stepped up to the plate and allowed those students to be a part of our program, and we paid their tuition. And that was totally understood by the president and the chancellor when I went to beg for this opportunity, that it would be a one-time opportunity, and that we would hope that we'd have the opportunity to allow those same amount of students to be a part of it for this upcoming year. And that's the reason you see the increase of 16K.
I appreciate that explanation. That helps.
Absolutely. And we're not going to say no this year as well. So I may have to be reaching out again. So we're just going to grow until we can grow, bust out of the seams.
Okay, thanks.
We understand what that means.
I do hope you do. And I just want to add that I do appreciate this opportunity for Embry-Riddle to continue to be a part of this partnership. Thank you for all of you who have had the opportunity to come by and visit and see. It is an amazing opportunity, and you are getting, our taxpayers are getting a return on their investment, more so than ever before. I wish you could be there on a daily basis to see the fruits of the labor and the opportunities that these students are having because of being in this program.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome very much.
Any other questions?
Well, again, I think it's a mutual respect, and thank you for what you do provide for our counties and our students in the county in both the north end and the south end, and getting them real world experience as well as exposure to local industry and opportunities for careers right here in our county, as well as beyond, and whether that's the spark that these students need to continue their education or to pursue an interest that they have. or further their education beyond Okaloosa County and
Absolutely.
continue on with one of your institutions or another institution within the state of Florida. So I appreciate all your efforts.
I appreciate you saying that, and I do want you all to know that even though we have Embry-Riddle posted all over that school, and I do appreciate, I pay for that, just want you to know that. I do want you to know that we are setting these students apart. When they go to apply for post-secondary education, their acceptance is immediate because of that dual enrollment opportunity. And I do want to add that I do want to educate them here. I want them to stay here and be a part of our workforce. So I am in tune to workforce needs, and we change our curriculum per local need. This past year we did managerial systems and certifications. Next year we're doing cybersecurity. I really try to find the hot potatoes of the industry needs to make that student be very aware that this is a need for you. I was challenged by Mr. Walker several years ago to increase our enrollments with young ladies, our female population, and we have been very successful in that. You'll walk in our classrooms and almost see 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40, but young ladies in the field of STEM education is becoming very important for us, and we are making a sincere interest. And also our president of our university has challenged me to that as well. So it's my pleasure to be a part of this program, a part of what you are doing for the students of this county and their success. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
May I be excused?
I'm not in charge of that part.
I would just like to one comment real
Yes, sir.
quick, Dr. White, that,
Yes, sir.
you know, we actually have Laurel Hill School participating in this program now. And, you know, for those children up there, that's a huge step forward. So, and I appreciate Embry-Riddle working to get those students involved too. So
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. All right, so moving on to 8.21. Title II, Part A, Teacher and Principal Training and Recruiting Fund 2018-2019 Grant Application presented by Mrs. Denise McLaughlin, Specialist Professional Development, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval.
And
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. White, again, just I feel like certainly our district staff does a phenomenal job in preparing these documents and these programs that are so vital to the functioning of our school district. But I don't want to take anything for granted and make sure that the general public understands you know, the title of this item is a grant, and it's, you know, frustrating to me on some level that items such as teacher and principal training is under a grant and not just funded. But also in regards to that, the funding for this grant has been reduced over time, and so obviously that directly impacts the school district on what we are and are not able to do in regards to teacher and principal training as well as recruiting. And you know, we've had multiple discussions already this morning about how difficult it is to hire certified and people who are experts in their field, and so grants of this nature are vital, but I also want the public to understand that it is a federal grant. This is an application. It's not a guarantee that we receive these funds, and then just like our state funding that we talked about, it can be determined that that funding source isn't available the following year. And so every year we are having to modify what we will and won't be able to do with those funds.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Rush. All right, 8.22, request authorization to schedule an employee appeals hearing presented by our attorney, Mr. McInnes.
Board members, we have an employee that has requested an appeal of a suspension. That's what this is, and we're recommending that the board conduct that hearing and allow us to get that scheduled.
Okay, very good, sir. All right, Section 9, Superintendent's Human Resources Recommendations. 9.1, this is an information item. Employees on administrative leave, presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.2, request to advertise a public hearing for the adoption of a new job description for mental health counselor, presented by Mrs. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.3, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised job description for custodial zone manager, presented by Ms. Lindsay Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.4, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of revised job description for lead custodian, presented by Mrs. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.5, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a revised job description for school custodian hourly, presented by Mrs. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.6, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a revised job description for school custodian 2, presented by Mrs. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.7, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a revised job description for school custodian 2 day, presented by Ms. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.8, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a revised job description for cleaner, presented by Mrs. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.9, request to advertise a public hearing for adoption of a new job description for roving cleaner, presented by Ms. Maxey, Specialist Human Resources, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.10, personnel, excuse me, yes ma'am,
I'm
back
sorry.
to 9.9.
Well, there were several job descriptions
Sure.
there in regards to custodial services, and again, I want to thank Ms. Maxey for her efforts to, again, update different job descriptions as well as working with our custodial positions on making a change on supervision of custodial services. But again, it's just something I want the public to be aware of, that over time, this is one of the many areas that we have had to cut due to lack of funding. And while there's no cuts being proposed or part of these job descriptions at all, since I've been a board member, we have had to reduce the number of custodial positions at our schools, so that even though they are aging facilities, due to the, as Ms. Gallen alluded to, we received less than 47 cents or approximately 47 cents per student this year, and then that fund was allocated, a lot of that to the mental health positions that we discussed. We have to make cuts in other areas, and over time, custodial services is one of those areas where we might have had 8 or 9 positions at one of our high schools, for example, or as we have increasing enrollment at our schools, but are having to reduce the number of staff members available to maintain our facilities.
That's good. All right, thank you, Ms. Rush. All right, so back to 9.10. Personnel recommendations presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.11, employment separations presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.12, employee transfers presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.13, employee suspension presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.14, employee suspension presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.15, reinstatement reimbursement of sick leave due to line of duty illness, injury, medical examination presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.16, leave without pay, presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. 9.17, instructional and educational support personnel recommendations for the 2018-2019 school year, presented by Mr. Chambers, Assistant Superintendent, Curriculum and Instruction, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. All right, moving down to Section 10 would be discussion agenda if any items are moved. Section 11 would be construction program owners, representatives, business, and we may receive a report on that Tuesday night. Section 11, Information Technology Seat Management Contract 12.1, CACI Task Order Number 2-05 for 9 additional cameras and DVR at Mary Esther Elementary School, presented by Mr. Keith, Specialist Seat Management, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And then 12.2, CACI Task Order Number 2-101 for security camera repairs at Okaloosa STEM Academy, presented by Mr. Keith, Specialist Seat Management, and recommended by the Superintendent for approval. And that takes us to attorney's business. Mr. McInnes.
No, sir, I had the request for hearing on the other matter.
All right, Superintendent's business, we have some out-of-state field trips, and Mr. Chambers, I defer that to you, sir.
Nothing at this time.
Board members' announcements and requests for information. How about we start with Mr. Bryant this time, okay?
Well, just one quick announcement.
Sure.
As we've been attending these graduation ceremonies, actually, we started last week with Richburg and Silver Sands. I just want to commend my 2 fellow school board members who were keynote speakers at Silver Sands was Ms. Thrush and Mr. Destin was at Richburg. Y'all did a phenomenal job speaking to those kids, and I was just really moved by your speeches for both of those schools, and those particular kids. Just to see their faces when they received their diploma that night, the next day, was just really exciting for us. And we also were able to talk about Fast Track we had Fast Track graduation, and it was amazing that a lot of folks didn't know about Fast Track. So we were able to get the word out about Fast Track, and we had 5 students that were able to receive their diploma along with the Richburg students last Friday. So, but my fellow school board members, I just wanted to say thank you for your speeches at those ceremonies.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Ms. Thrush.
I also have attended, along with my colleagues, different senior award ceremonies, and I just wanted to thank all the community members and organizations throughout the Panhandle who offer an amazing number of scholarships and donations to so many of our young men and women graduating, and offer them a leg up in whatever their next direction in life is. So thank you to all of those community members and support organizations that we have. And then I wanted to wish, it's already gotten started, the Niceville High School Lady Eagle softball team is currently playing in the 7A state finals, and I'm sure they're doing a great job. A shout out to many of the ladies who will miss their own graduation this evening while they participate in that game. So best of luck to the Lady Eagles.
And Ms. Thrush, along with your remarks, I remember that the other night when you and I were at Fort Walton's award ceremony, that Mr. Spolsky was running a tally of literally the millions of dollars that were awarded at Fort Walton Beach High School, and I know the other schools are doing the same thing, and I think, Mr. Horton, in the past you've even given us some idea of the amount of money that our students receive in terms of these scholarships. Mr. Destin?
Nothing this morning, Chairman.
Okay. And thank goodness the weather's holding off. Let's just hope it holds off through tomorrow night as well, because I'll be greeting several hundred students tonight at Choctawhatchee's high school graduation. All right, that's all I've got. Anything else?
Best of luck to the class of 2018.
Congratulations. We're done. Okay, now is this the same? Okay. You want me to do anything with this?